What is up, everybody? I'm No Lux Given here with your afternoon snap, and today I'm going to be reviewing all of the cards coming to Spotlight Caches this month, October 2024, the We Are Venom season of Marvel Snap. I'm also going to review the bonus card that we're going to get in a little bit, plus the season pass card, but I'm going to take a look at those at the end of the video because the primary focus here is the free-to-play experience. I am a free-to-play Marvel Snap player, and that has a little bit of restrictions on how I view cards in terms of making the most out of my in-game resources. Generally, that means focusing on one or two new releases each season, and also looking for opportunities where there's returning cards to Spotlight Caches that you still don't own. That allows you to use your keys really effectively and make the most out of your resources. And another thing to keep in mind just as far as efficiently using keys goes, only open up on weeks when you have 4 keys or more in your collection. Otherwise, if you wind up opening with less and you don't open the card that you were looking for, you just wasted keys and you fall further and further behind. It's much better to wait and then have opportunities where you can open up multiple cards maybe a month or two later. And those come around. Definitely waiting is like the biggest advice that you can have as a free-to-play player, I think. And also on the topic of waiting, I also do recommend that you wait a little bit before you make your decisions. You don't have to buy your cards on Tuesday unless you really think you're gonna need a card and want to play it in Tuesday's tournament, and also you think the card's gonna be like fun. But otherwise, I really recommend just waiting until the weekend, getting a little bit more information, watching some content for Marvel Snap creators that might contain that card, including my tournament reports, seeing how other people fared with the new card, and then make your decision on the weekend before the card rotates out of Spotlight Caches. With all that out of the way, let's take a look at what October has to offer. I think what I'm gonna do here as sort of like a visualizer, because I didn't make a graphic with each of the individual weeks. So when I am talking about a new week, I'm just gonna drag all 3 cards into S tier, and I'll throw the new card on the screen like this, and that way we can talk about it and see the week as a whole, right? Because we're gonna be opening Spotlight Caches for all 3 of these cards this week. I will focus the discussion initially though on Scream, the newest card, which definitely surprised me. I've already talked about this card a little bit because it made the top 4 of this week's community gaming tournament, which I was not expecting. And that's partially why I say to like wait until the weekend and make your decisions, because maybe people wouldn't have picked up Scream, but after seeing people play it, yeah, it seems pretty cool. It's actually a really good build around card that takes a lot of other cards that were like fringe playability, many of which have recently been buffed up. I went through that in the video as well. Craven, this is just off the top of my head, but Craven, Arrow, Stegron, all of these cards have recently received a buff. That might be it as far as the cards that typically go alongside Scream. No, Kingpin. Kingpin also got a buff, down to 1 energy, but definitely a buff, right? And all of those buffs, plus a powerful build-around card, I think does make Scream quite powerful. Man-Thing, I'm still a little bit out on. I don't have Man-Thing. I do think if you have Man-Thing, this art is fantastic. I'm not going to talk about the art too much, but when I was putting this video together, I typically just grab all of the classic artwork on every card. And then I saw this artwork for Man-Thing and I was like, oh, I need to include this because I think some people might try to pick up Man-Thing just specifically for this art because it looks really sweet. So I did just want to like small touch on that, but I won't touch on the artwork too much otherwise. But Affliction is still a strategy that I'm not super sold on, and Man-Thing is a reasonably important card in Affliction decks, but I don't really like Affliction decks, so I still think I'm going to pass on Man-Thing. I don't own the card. That might color my perception on it a little bit, but I don't think that it is fantastic. But if you don't have Man-Thing and you were like on the fence about picking up Scream, then I could see that like pushing you over potentially just a little bit. But Man-Thing is also, this is partially why I wanted to talk about it too, it is played in most Affliction decks. It is not played in the junk Affliction decks. And it is, I have seen Ajax see a little bit of play recently alongside Scream because it steals the power, so it afflicts those cards and is able to pump up your Ajax. So those decks aren't going to play Man-Thing. Junk decks also don't really need Man-Thing because if you're junking your opponent, you just don't need to Man-Thing them. Also, Man-Thing can see some play in like Spectrum lists, but for the most part, those aren't super powerful either. I could see those being reasonable for a starting collection. However, if you are looking to make those decks better, Man-Thing is certainly an improvement over some of the cards that are in those decks. However, there's, I think, other ways to improve your collection that are more meaningful for the resources that Man-Thing costs. So for that reason, I'm out on Man-Thing still and would still pass on him. Another card in this week's Spotlight Caches is Mobius, and Mobius, who, believe it or not, because it's not really seeing much play right now, but believe it or not, Mobius has been at times the #1 played card in Marvel Snap. And that is a very, very crowning achievement, beating out Shang-Chi, beating out Loki. And the reason for that is because it was a really good tech card against Loki when Loki was omnipresent and Mobius was at the TVA trying to keep him in check. Very flavorful. But unfortunately now with Loki and even Sarah, I mean, Sarah's kind of coming back. There's a new Sarah deck right now, and there's always going to be some type of discount energy cheat in Marvel Snap that is good. But right now, it's not good enough that's pushing Mobius to really see play as a relevant tech card. There's other things you gotta stop right now that don't really look to reduce energy costs. Mobius is also a combo piece alongside Pixie, and when that deck is the best is when Mobius is also a good tech card. So if Mobius is a good tech card, then Mobius Pixie also gets a little bit better, but you don't really want to play Pixie plus Mobius when Mobius isn't good. It's just a lot less powerful. But it is cool that there is a combo with him, and he's not replaceable in that deck when you want to play it. But it's just not that deck's time to shine right now. We do see Anti-Venom coming later this season that could be a card that Mobius is ready to stop, but for right now, Mobius is, I would say, stop spending your keys on Mobius. He's borderline, no, he's got to be at least a C tier, just because that Pixie deck is really cool. I personally put Man-Thing down in C tier too. Like I said, I don't have Man-Thing. Maybe that colors my perception of it a little bit, because I don't have any experience playing with the card, but it just really doesn't excite me. Scream does excite me. Here's the thing about Scream. I think that it might be a B like power level wise, right? However, by picking it up, you just have access to a new deck. There's some other Series 4 and Series 5 cards in that deck that you might not have. However, there are a lot of Series 2 and Series 3 cards in that deck. Polaris, Spider-Man, what else do we have? Magneto even, and Stegron. A lot of these cards are pretty cheap cards as far as Marvel Snap is concerned, and the fact that Scream just takes all of these cards that you probably already have and allows you to complete a deck, I think is pretty cool. So I do want to give Scream some shout outs for that. She's probably low A tier, high B tier. I'm also assuming, yeah, she's a woman. She's got these long hair and some breasts. So Scream, I don't know all of the characters super well. I'm seeing like Misery coming up next, and I cannot tell the gender of Misery. Maybe this is another woman. Let's move on to our second week of Spotlight Caches with Misery, Namora, and War Machine. So first we have our new card, Misery. On reveal, repeat the on-reveal abilities of your other cards here, then destroy them. And it's a 4/7 also, which is pretty good. Man-Thing level stats. I think that this card is not great. I think that it's the worst card coming this season, probably. I do think there are some really cool cards coming this season, and I do think Misery has some cool potential build-arounds, but I'm conflicted because I love me an Absorbing Man, I love me a Grandmaster, and I love just the ability to trigger things again, because those cards have the ability to really get out of hand with like Wong plus Odin, some cool stuff like that. However, Misery doesn't have the same high roll potential because of the fact that she's destroying stuff, or he, Misery. Misery works with a different subset of cards than all of the other cards I just named. You can use Misery on like your White Tiger and not feel bad, but you can't use it on your Black Panther unless you've got like armor out. Oh, that's interesting. You could armor and then play Misery, and then it is just like an additional Odin. Okay, we're brewing, we're building, but I don't think that's going to be the primary use for it. I think, like the season video showcased, the primary incentive here to destroy is Electro and the Hood, which there's a lot of ways to get good use out of the Hood this month. I don't think Misery is going to be the best among them. There could be some other interesting things like reactivating White Widow seems pretty good, and especially in some of these junk mirrors, some of these clog mirrors, I think that Misery could have a little bit more chance to shine. But and that armor idea that I really just came up with, I think is interesting. But I think there's just better cards coming this season is really the long and the short of it, and for that reason, I think you have to go a little bit worse on Misery here. Next we have Namora, and full disclosure, I think I will be opening up for Misery. One, because I think she can probably create some cool content as just another funny bit. I mean, I'm going to try that armor thing now. So I'll definitely be doing that next week. And also because I don't have Namora or War Machine yet. And that means that I'm just going to spend 4 Spotlight Caches and pick up all of these. If I open up 1 Spotlight Cache and get War Machine on the first go, I might stop there. Because War Machine's really cool. War Machine, I'm going to throw at high A tier right now. It has it is the essential card in a build-around deck that might not be the most powerful. It did get second place in last week's tournament, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly. Yes, yeah, got second place in last week's tournament. So I think that that's pretty sweet, but I don't know, it lacks a little bit of power on ladder because your opponent can just retreat and only lose 1 or 2 cubes, as opposed to like having some surprising factor. But I think the fact that it's like not replaceable in the decks that it is played in, it's the build around card for a number of reasons. It's a build around with Legion for the Storm War Machine Legion combo where you lock your opponent out, and it's also a build around allowing you to play cards like Ebony Maw and Infinite in your decks. And also, I brought this up, I think it's just a good tech card. I think you could throw War Machine into your Arishem lists and then just not have to worry if any weird locations come up that you're just gonna get clogged out of the game, because that can be a real issue in Arishem, not being able to spend all of your energy and just getting a bunch of random cards. War Machine is like I would say War Machine is to Jeff the Baby Landshark, same way that Legion is to Scarlet Witch. You play Legion if you have a bunch of extra energy because you're playing Arishem and you want your location management card to just have a lot higher impact. In the same way, playing War Machine could be a new Jeff in Arishem lists going forward, I think, at least. So it's kind of a good stuff card, and it is also a build around card, and for that reason it gets an A tier for me. This one might seem controversial though. I don't think Nomura is an essential build around card. I think a lot of the decks that play, so you look at these Symbiote, Spider-Man, Galactus lists that popped up last season. Many of those decks are very, very similar to the decks that were running Nomura a few seasons ago. Wong, Odin, White Tiger, trying to make the most out of on-reveal cards, and these decks don't play Nomura. Now, Nomura decks also typically want like Nightcrawler and Jeff and Nocturne, so that way they can have some flexibility in how all of those stats get used. But the point being, I kind of feel like Nomura decks aren't playing Nomura anymore. And if they aren't, then I'm going to have to say Nomura to Nomura. No Moria. And I will throw that probably down in C tier. But I think it's worse than Man-Thing. It's possibly worse than Mobius. I think it sees a little bit more play than Mobius, but Mobius's ability to be an interesting tech card, I think, does give it an edge over Nomura. I'm really not hot on Nomura right now, as you can tell. And apologies, I will move over Misery right here. Let me just take a second and move over all of these cards. They're invisible right now, but I'm just doing that in OBS. And now we will move on to our next card, and that is going to be, let's see, did I do it right? Yes, Scorn. So we've got Scorn, Jean Grey, and Sebastian Shaw. And I've already talked about Scorn a little bit in my video with Yuckmouth, where Yuckmouth is a member of the team behind Once Upon a Galaxy, and they have not played Marvel Snap ever, and they did some Marvel Snap card ratings with me. That was a fun video I put out 2-3 weeks ago, so feel free to check that out. But at the end of the video, I asked Yuck about Scorn, just as kind of like a cute way to tie it in and get Marvel Snap players excited for the upcoming season. I think Scorn is good. I think Scorn is real good. When you discard this, return it to your hand and give +2 power to itself and one of your cards in play. So this is a card that goes into those Apocalypse discard decks, and I think it is potentially a card that those decks really want and are really interested in. I think having a 3rd/4th payoff card in those decks, in addition to Apocalypse, Swarm, and Proxima Midnight, that also has a very, very high upside, is actually what you're looking for. Scorn also pumps up your collector just a little bit, but +1 every time when you return it. So I think that that is a cool interaction. And the other thing about those decks, and we just saw one get, I want to say 5th or 6th place. It got top 8 in the most recent community gaming tournament. Everyone got really excited over Hella when Hell Cow became an activate ability, and I think people are just starting to realize, wait a minute, Apocalypse discard actually just got a lot better too. And Scorn as an additional payoff in that deck, I think is really cool and could potentially make those decks a lot stronger. It also attacks in a slightly different way. It's still able to get like Shadow Kinged and stuff, but it is another card that works with Dracula. I'll say only kind of though, because only costing 1, you'll usually have the opportunity to play this on the final turn of the game, unless the other card in your hand is Apocalypse, which also works with Dracula. I guess if you're playing like Hellcarrier or something, you could like, I don't know, play the Hellcarrier and discard this to Dracula or something like that. But it is a grow wide card. It's pumping up a bunch of different random cards and pumping up itself. So also kind of grow tall. And I think that it's just enough stats. I think +4 every time is really good value for the discard. That is Apocalypse. +2 on one of your cards and itself is +4. That's the exact same buff you're getting out of Apocalypse. If you could play a second Apocalypse in your discard deck that is built around Apocalypse, yeah, you'd do it. And that's what Scorn is. So I think that it is just really, really powerful and will make a deck that is already kind of trending upwards, trend even more upwards. However, it only goes in that deck. Scorn only goes in the discard deck. I think power level wise, I think it's better than Scream. I think I'm going to be picking up Scorn this month, unless, I don't know. It just depends on like if other people are respecting it. If everybody's saying Scorn is bad, I'm going to pick it up just to prove everybody wrong. I might pick it up anyways, just because there is also a Marvel Snap Creator Tournament coming up next weekend, and I think Scorn could be a top card. Oh wait, but it won't be out in time. No, it won't. It'll be out the next weekend though for the top 32. So maybe if I top 32 the tournament, I could take Scorn into that. That would be really sweet. I do think that it is very strong power level wise, but I can understand if people aren't sold on Scorn specifically because it only goes into one deck. And you might also be thinking, wait, Scream only goes into one deck. The difference is Scorn goes into one deck and you can play the deck without Scorn. You can do it. However, Scream you need. So as a free-to-play player, Scream opens up a whole new deck for you and is potentially a little bit more valuable for the collection. But I do think Scorn is, I don't know, I don't watch too many other like content creators or read what other people are saying, especially before doing my own reviews, because I want to give you guys my personal opinions. My personal opinion, it's been out there for a few weeks now, I think Scorn is very good. And yeah, I just think the activate change to Hell Cow makes discard look even more betterer than it was before. So Scorn is a hit for me. Next one is pretty easy, Jean Grey. I'm gonna throw that down in D tier without too much more discussion. Jean Grey does have an interesting build around deck that was seeing play a few months ago. It was like Jean Grey and then you play some Guardians and stuff. And there was also a Jean Grey deck with War Machine where your opponent is forced to play around Jean Grey and you have a little bit more flexibility starting on the next 2 turns. It's just not that exciting. This artwork is cool, but otherwise I think Jean is a pass. Next we have Sebastian Shaw. Where should Sebastian Shaw go? definitely better than Mobius by a long shot. It probably goes high C tier. Sebastian Shaw is a very good card. It's very playable and a good card in every deck containing Silver Surfer. It's not really a good card in any deck not containing Silver Surfer, and you don't need Sebastian Shaw to play Silver Surfer, but it is played in every single Silver Surfer list. So if you want to be competitive with Silver Surfer, certainly you want Sebastian Shaw. Actually, that might not be true, because there's a new Silver Surfer deck that a lot of players have just started playing. It might not be a Sebastian Shaw deck. If it isn't, then Sebastian is definitely earning his C tier placement, but he really does not see play anywhere else outside of that. He could see play in like a Wakanda deck with Okoye, Nakia, Scarlet Spider, Forge, Agony, Aranya, those types of things, a bunch of ways to pump up your cards. Those have not typically been super successful, with Silver Surfer being one of the best pump cards in the game, and Sebastian Shaw being a 3-cost card. That has been the natural home for him. And I'm kind of putting him low for a similar reason to Scorn, but I think Sebastian Shaw is even more replaceable. I don't think Scorn is that replaceable in the discard decks. Like, I say that Scorn is replaceable in Sebastian, well, I say Scorn is replaceable because you can play discard decks right now and they don't have Scorn, right? Scorn isn't necessarily going to like create a new archetype. I do think it is going to make an existing archetype extremely better. And honestly, Sebastian probably does the same thing. I should mention this. I mean, you've noticed this. I order within the tiers. So if something is over here, I'm putting it at high C tier, borderline B. But I think this is a clean way to represent all of that, if that makes sense. We are about halfway done, and our next week of Spotlight caches contains Toxin, Zabu, and Elsa Bloodstone. Toxin has, on reveal, return your other cards here to your hand. +2 power for each returned. I think there are a lot of good players that are very excited about Toxin because there are a lot of players that really like Bounce, and I'm kind of inclined to agree. Bounce is arguably the best it's ever been. No, it has been better in the past, but Bounce is seeing a lot of play right now. It is a natural answer to clog decks as well, which are also very good. And if you are sort of like Destroy in that way, if you are playing a deck that is good against clog while also just like doing the game plan that it already wants to do, that's a pretty powerful thing. And Toxin does a pretty nice Carnage impression, which means you can actually wind up getting value out of your opponent's clog. And that seems pretty good. It also just seems good in the bounce decks that are good right now, specifically because bounce decks have recently added in the Activate Black Swan, which I feel gives the deck higher potential ceilings. And if you have higher potential ceilings because you can play a bunch of cards for free, Toxin is going to increase that ceiling even further and just be very, very powerful. You can also start, like, if you get a Toxin out early, then the next turn you can play, you can beast your Toxin, and then you can replay the Toxin next turn and bounce it and just keep going. And all of that seems very, very good. Bounce is in a similar way to like discard, already a playable deck without Toxin. However, I think there's two key differences here. I think that Bounce is a much better deck than Apocalypse Discard, and I think that Toxin is potentially better than Scorn. I think Toxin, it's either going to be high A tier for me, or push it into S tier. I'm willing to put it into, I think it's the only S tier card this season. That might not be true. Well, for free-to-play players at least, I think it's the only S tier card. So we will give Toxin the S tier. I'm going to keep it in A+ for now, just so I can put the cards that I'm currently talking about up here at the top of the screen. But I think Toxin probably makes its way into S for most players, with a small caveat that the cards that it's releasing aside are very much not good. Zabu is kind of like a D tier, except I've been playing some Zabu recently, so I feel like it's not totally fair to put it on D tier. It is pretty low on C tier though. I mean, it's seeing more play than Mobius in my collection, but for most players, I think that Zabu finds its way to like the back of C tier, the high of D tier. Like I said, I do think that it is really cool with Wiccan, and I'm probably not the only person playing Wiccan. I don't know. I think it's really fun with Wiccan. I've got reservations because the best shell that I found with Zabu and Wiccan is a Quicksilver Agatha deck, which is like a little bit on the side of silly, but it was still strong, don't get me wrong. I do think that there is probably potential for Zabu in a less all-in Wiccan deck that still plays Psylocke, still plays Zabu, but instead of Quicksilver and Agatha, plays a variety of 1-cost cards and then plays some 2-cost cards as well, like Kate Bishop. I haven't really seen that though, and as far as like other competitive play, I haven't really seen anything from Zabu. I do know there is one other Quicksilver Zabu deck, at least I think it's a Quicksilver Zabu deck, that curves out into Galactus with Wiccan. So I think that there's some other people playing it, but not too many. And you can pump up Zabu a little bit if you like my Zabu Wiccan deck that I was playing with a few weeks ago. But most players will probably put it pretty low, and most players will also probably put Elsa Bloodstone pretty low, because she has not really seen play recently. She's an interesting card against Clog decks, and alongside Kitty Pryde. I mean, Kitty Pryde is very good against Clog decks, but I'm saying like Clog decks kind of like fill your locations for you, so that kind of makes it easier to activate Elsa, but she just doesn't have the juice right now. They've taken some numbers away from her and changed around how she works a few times here and there, but mostly just from taking away the numbers, she has really fallen, because that's all she is. She's just numbers. She's some really cool numbers when combined with cards like Kitty Pryde that can get multiple activations, and movement cards that you can fill up a location and then move them out, and then fill up the location with a different move card. But yeah, just recently she really has not seen any play. So that's where I'm going to throw Elsa for now. And next card we're going to throw in here is Anti-Venom, which seems pretty cool to me. This card is kind of like a Mr. Negative, and honestly could be a cool card for Zabu coming up, but probably not, to be honest. But this card has, on reveal, set the cost and power of your deck's top card to 0. I'll just outline the curve that potentially works with Zabu. It's Howard the Duck into Zabu. With the idea being that a turn 1 Howard then gives you more information about when you want to anti-venom, and Zabu gives you more opportunities. You play Zabu on 2, on turn 3, look at the top card. If it's worth anti-venoming, then you do. If it's not, then you just hang on to your venom and play a different 4-cost card, and maybe like Jubilee, dig a little bit deeper or something, though. I don't know. It's probably not that. I'm not exactly sure what the rest of the deck looks like. I'm just thinking, if you want to play big cards and you want to play Anti-Venom and you want to play Zabu, Jubilee would probably make sense in that deck. There are like otherwise not huge incentives for playing Anti-Venom earlier as opposed to later though, because you could always, you'll always be able to play the card that you draw off Anti-Venom. It's not like Agent Venom and not like Mr. Negative in that way. It's very similar to both of those cards, but it's very different in that playing it earlier doesn't really have a big impact as long as you play it on at least turn 5. A card that costs 0 is going to be very easy to make use of at any point in your final turn, as long as your opponent doesn't have Mobius. Potentially Sandman, that could be another card, though Sandman has really dropped off in play a lot. But Anti-Venom seems very cool to me. How good is it going to be? I'm not super sure. It kind of is like an Iron Lad because, well, it's a 4/6 with on reveal, and it gives you the top card of your deck more or less for free. Sometimes more, sometimes less. There's going to be cards that work better with Anti-Venom and cards that work better with Iron Lad, though they do work pretty well with, they've got an overlap. There's a lot of cards that they both work very similarly with. Iron Man, getting that card for free. Basically cards that you don't care that you're going to set their power to 0 because they're already 0 are really good with Anti-Venom, and that is typically going to be cards that were otherwise good with Mr. Negative. That's also partially why I bring up Zabu 2, because, well, speaking of 2, you want 2 cards in your Mr. Negative deck that you can play on turn 2 to play a turn 3 Mr. Negative. And a lot of times we see that is Psylocke and Ravonna. Ravonna doesn't work with Anti-Venom though, and maybe that's fine. Maybe you're just not playing Mr. Negative with Anti-Venom. That's definitely one possibility. And the other possibility is that you don't really need to curve out and get an Anti-Venom out there on turn 3. There are some incentives though, I will say that. Turn 3 Anti-Venom, though even turn 4 Anti-Venom can do this. Yeah, okay, the idea that I have in my head right now is Moon Girl. If you are able to grab that 0 cost card, you could then Moon Girl it if it's particularly powerful. That could be an interesting strategy though. That's not really something that we ever see with Mr. Negative, so it's probably not something that we'll need to see with Anti-Venom. And honestly, just getting a free Iron Man or a free Arnim Zola, like, those are good enough things that we don't need to take them even further, probably, right? So if you can hit with Anti-Venom, it seems cool. It might actually make Howard playable, but the other way that you typically make Howard that you work with Iron Lad is you just only play hits, right? You only play hits, and depending on what you've drawn, you have a decent idea of also what is in your deck. There's a little bit less flexibility in some capacities, but I could see a deck that, the reason I bring up the Mr. Negative is because if you want to play just a bunch of cards to make it so that Anti-Venom has a higher chance of hitting, if you're going to be playing Iron Man, Null, Arnim Zola, well, yeah, probably you want to just throw Mr. Negative in that deck as well, and whichever one you draw it's kind of like a backup mini Mr. Negative, but allowing you to still go Iron Man Arnim Zola or Null Arnim Zola. Those are all cool, potentially game-winning things. So I think that Anti-Venom is cool. He's neat. He doesn't immediately slide into some decks. He maybe requires a little bit more creativity, but I think he's more fun for now. I don't think he's going to be super high powered, but so if there was a few more cards in the B tier, maybe we could even move Sebastian Shaw up. Like, yeah, this seems fair. because I think he's like low B, high C, but I think he's better than Misery. So I think this is a fair place for Anti-Venom. Yeah, I like this. Ghost Spider could also probably join in B tier here. Ghost Spider, pretty similar to Sebastian Shaw in terms of her ubiquitousness in the decks that she's good in, but also now kind of the replaceableness. So this isn't really something that I thought about too much when discussing Aranya last season, but Aranya, very good. I believe I put Aranya at B tier, and Aranya is better than Ghost Spider. So I could see even putting Ghost Spider down into C tier because, I mean, everybody has Iron Fist, and you really don't need, even in like the Phoenix Force decks, you don't need Ghost Spider and Aranya and Iron Fist and the arrow, the grapple arrow from Kate Bishop and whatever other move cards you're playing. Like, at some point, there's just too many of these cards and the worst one's got to get cut. I don't think Ghost Spider is the worst one. Usually Iron Fist is the first one up on the chopping block, though sometimes it's Aranya if you're playing like a bounce move deck. But I do just want to bring that up that like Ghost Spider, while fairly ubiquitous in all of the move decks, think you could actually get away without owning her and still playing move and still having fun. I mean, you could just play Madame Web move and you are feeling fine without Ghost Spider in a lot of scenarios. But like I said, still good to have if you are interested in those decks. And honestly, it's probably a little less replaceable than Sebastian Shaw. So yeah, I mean, I did have Sebastian down at C tier initially. I think Ghost Spider is probably a little bit better than him. And yeah, specifically Ghost Spider, like, don't get me wrong. You can activate Aranya, then play, or no, you'd have to go play Iron Fist, activate Aranya, play your Human Torch, then play Ghost Spider. You can do that and you can move your Iron or your Human Torch 3 times and that is really sweet. But yeah, just sometimes it feels like the deck is a little bit crowded for those cheap effects when you are trying to fit them all in, especially in like bounce move decks or clog move decks, like decks that are also trying to do something else. There's just too many cards that all do like really similar things. So Ghost Spider is really only seeing play in that unique archetype, but that seems to be pretty common among these B tier cards. So she kind of sits right at home here. And next is the homie Super Giant. That's gonna get a giant D tier for me. Yeah, it's worse than Jean Grey. I think it is. I mean, so again, disclosure, I do not own Supergiant, so that also colors my perception of a little bit. I'm like, oh, I've never played Supergiant. It must be terrible. Well, I've never played it because I don't own it, and I have played Jean Grey. But yeah, Supergiant, just not really exciting. There's like, I never really even understand. I'm trying to think right now of exactly what Supergiant does, and the only thing that I can think of, so its text as a reminder is like, next turn your cards aren't revealed until the end of the game. And it means that your turn 5 cards can have, so it's good against Serra, right? That's interesting. It is good against potentially like weird stuff like Galactus out of ramp decks. Anything that needs to set up on turn 5. It could be good against Clog, specifically Annihilus. Sometimes it's very bad against Annihilus though too, because then they just play their Annihilus on turn 5 and then play Sentry on turn 6. It is good with Annihilus sometimes in decks that want to build around that specific synergy that I just described, to have more flexibility in terms of when they can draw their Sentry for that really powerful combo. And that would be similar for Cersei game plans as well. But overall, Supergiant just like isn't good enough proactively in those Cersei and Nihilist decks to be worth inclusion, and isn't a powerful enough disruptive element against a lot of the metagame. Maybe as Sarah looks to start coming back in, it's good against Jane Foster. That's something else interesting. But what else is it good against? It is actually reasonable against Bounce because it just gives them, and sometimes Destroy decks, giving them one less turn to do like setup stuff to have a really huge final turn if they can't blow up their X23 or bounce a bunch of cards on the penultimate turn there. Supergiant does have some uses. What it's really missing, I think, is like with Mobius, having a proactive game plan that really benefits from the Supergiant so that it is a tech card that also allows you to do some powerful things yourself. Currently, what you wind up doing with Supergiant, I think for the most part, is like playing tech on that 5th turn of the game. You could play like a Cannonball or something maybe, and then on turn 6 play Shang-Chi and Shadow King, and then on the final turn you've got the reveal of all 3 of those tech cards. Something like that could seem a little bit cool, but I don't think it is moving the needle really too much just yet. We have a few more cards coming here in this video because we have a bonus card this season. We're gonna have a new game mode. I believe, I wanna say it's called High Voltage. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I will say we will be doing a lot of high voltage content when that comes around. That seems really, really cool. Ironically, Agony is going to be terrible in high voltage mode because you will never play 1-cost cards unless you're like really, really bouncing with it. Okay, but Agony isn't good in those decks. She does not have an honor reveal ability. She has, after you play a card here, merge this with it. Now, Agony was not in the season preview video, so I don't have 100% confirmation on how she works, but I'm assuming it's going to be like Hulkbuster, but the other way around and without an on reveal ability. And how good is Hulkbuster as a 1/2? Well, we did see, so Hulkbuster is seeing play in Destroy. So that is definitely something in Agony's favor, right? There's an interesting part of that, though, that is when they went to nerf Hulkbuster, they changed it from a 3/5 to a 2/3. They brought it down in both cost and power. And for some aspects, that does make Hulkbuster more powerful. And that could make Agony even more powerful still, right? It's definitely possible. And I'm not saying that that's not true. I think that that might be true. One thing that we have to remember is that there was at one point a 1-cost Forge as a 1/1 that gave the next card that you played +2 power. Now we have Aranya kind of filling that role, and I personally currently have Aranya in my Destroy deck. I might make that, yeah. I will, I have a YouTube short with Aranya in Destroy. I was either going to put it out like next weekend or something, but I might just put it out today, just so that it lines up with this video, and I'm talking about it here. This is a good effect to be able to go turn 1, pump up your Deadpool that you haven't played yet, turn 2 Deadpool, it's already at 3 power, and then turn 3 you can destroy it to double it up to 6. That is very, very good, and I think that Agony could see some play. I do think that she's probably worse than Aranya in that capacity, specifically for the combo that I showcase in today's YouTube short. But she's fine. She's playable, especially if you don't have Aranya. I don't think that you need Aranya and Hulkbuster and Agony. But playing 2 of the 3 of those doesn't seem terrible. What other cards will Agony get played with? Black Panther, Scarlet Spider, all of those seem like potential options. And I will just say that Forge was nerfed for a reason, and Agony is going to do a lot of the stuff that Forge did. You know what? Yeah, no, she's got to be better than Anti-Venom. I think she goes right here. I think she's going to be better than Anti-Venom. You think about like all of the cards she could work with. Brood too. I believe. I'm saying all of that without exactly knowing how this card will work, but I think it's going to be a reasonably playable card, and everybody gets it for free. So there's no real reason even putting it on the tier list, because you don't have to spend any resources other than your time, and your time is a resource. It does mean you're spending less time playing other modes, but I think it'll be worth it to play Thunder Dome for whatever reason, just because it'll be fun, it'll be a change up, and if you get a new card out of the deal, seems pretty good to me. Next up, we've got the Season Pass card. Symbiote, Agent Venom. Sorry, I was getting a little bit confused here too, because I also want to talk about Symbiote Spider-Man, because Symbiote Spider-Man is the previous Season Pass card, which means now it is available to free-to-play players for the first time. So I've got to think about, do I want to spend tokens on Symbiote Spider-Man? And last season, I put Symbiote Spider-Man right here, high in A tier. I think it would go in a pretty similar spot. It is probably a little bit worse. Maybe here or here. It has gotten better since the beginning of last season, and that's something important to consider. Symbiote Spider-Man has gotten an additional power. Oh yeah, you can see it right here. The image that I have on screen is from last season. I just copied that over from the folder. So now Symbiote Spider-Man is a 4/7. Didn't even notice that, but that is a good opportunity to talk about that. They also gave an additional power to both Galactus and Black Panther, the 2 most synergistic cards with Symbiote Spider-Man. So yeah, the card's gotten a little bit better since I last talked about it, and I think it is probably worth the tokens if, especially, you're like me, you're potentially a long time viewer of this channel. I used to be a Galactus one trick, more or less. I really only played Galactus, and it hasn't been good for a while, but Symbiote Spider-Man puts it back on the map. I'm probably going to want to play around with that eventually. It doesn't, though, seem like Symbiote Spider-Man is doing that much outside of that deck, other than the Black Panther shenanigans, which I also mentioned. I do think that the Galactus and Black Panther strategies can be very powerful. They aren't the most powerful thing that you can do in the game, as someone suggested in the comments on my last video. There was like a comment that was like, I won't even draw attention to it, because let's highlight some of the positivity here. And I think that Symbiote Spider-Man is pretty good for sure. Definitely better than it was last season, and it's kind of an irreplaceable card in the decks that it's good. It's a little... I think that the deck is less powerful than the Scream decks, though it has more potential to high roll. And also, unlike the Scream decks, you need a bunch of other Series 5 cards. You need the... I don't know what Series Black Panther is. That might be Series 4 at this point. But you need Galactus. You need some of the other expensive things. It could be good with like Namora or something too, though it would wind up copying onto the Wong in that case. So wouldn't really work out. But yeah, either way, I think Symbiote Spider-Man is kind of a unique card. And like I've said with Misery, I do really like me a Grandmaster / absorbing man ability, which Symbiote Spider-Man is, and yeah, I do think it's good. The other card that we do have to talk about, though, is the new Season Pass card. As a free-to-play player, I won't be picking this card up anytime soon, unless I potentially decide to break from the ranks of free-to-play for the first time because of that upcoming Marvel Snap content creator clash. Yeah, I could see that if Agent Venom is as good as it's looking, because things are looking good for Agent Venom. It was in 3 decks in the top 8 for the first community gaming tournament of the season that I covered. I'm sure it's going to continue to do pretty good things as a lot of cards in Bounce synergize with it. There is an interesting decision that comes up when Toxin comes out, though, because, well, Agent Venom does pump up your Toxin. So I'll give Agent Venom that to give it even a little bit more credit. But are the decks going to be able to incorporate all of these setup cards? These are, I don't know which way to view it. Is Hawkeye the setup card, or is Hawkeye the payoff card? Feels like Hawkeye's the payoff, and Beast and Agent Venom and Toxin, these are all the setup cards, because Hawkeye is kind of the carry, even though the decks don't play Hawkeye precisely. They might play Silver Sable, they might play Rocket Raccoon, those type of effects. But you need to have a balance from both ends, and at some point, the deck has too many cards in this bucket. You can't play Falcon and Black Swan and Beast and Toxin and Agent Venom and more and still have enough cards that get value out of bouncing them and out of making them bigger with Agent Venom. So that is a little bit of a thing to watch out for once Toxin comes out. Might possibly make Agent Venom a little bit worse, though. I don't know. Maybe if you're really in a pinch, you cut like the Falcon or something. For today, that is going to be it for me. Let me know what you thought of this video and anything you disagree on as far as these rankings and things go. Anything that I didn't think about, just be respectful about it is all I'm gonna ask. And for today, that is going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Lex Given. Peace.